Breaking news! Things are moving behind the scenes at the Miami Dolphins, and we have a lot to talk about. Fans are anxious to know what Chris Grier's strategy will be to take the Dolphins to the playoffs this year. I confess that I'm not expecting much. We know that Grier has done a terrible job as GM, and I can't see anything very promising. In my opinion, Chris Grier should be fired. Only then could we dream of the playoffs and, who knows, a Super Bowl. If you agree with this, hit the like button hard. If possible, right, the Miami Dolphins are great, but they need changes. Let's talk about free agency. The Miami Dolphins just received important news that could shake up their approach to free agency, and it's not what most fans expected. With the start of NFL free agency fast approaching, a major development involving Kansas City Chiefs offensive guard Trey Smith has sent ripple effects through the market, potentially complicating Miami's plans to overhaul its offensive line. But that's not all. There are also crucial updates on Dolphins cornerback Kader Kohou and what the team can do to keep him around. Let's break it all down. First, let's talk about Trey Smith. Just a few days ago, reports surfaced that the Chiefs are planning to franchise tag him. Now, why is this a big deal? Well, it means that instead of hitting the open market as one of the most sought-after offensive linemen, Smith will remain in Kansas City unless a long-term deal is reached. The franchise tag locks him into a one-year deal worth $23.4 million, making him the highest-paid guard in the NFL on an annual basis, even if it's only for 1 year. So, why does this matter to Miami? It's not because the Dolphins were in the mix to land Smith. Instead, the issue is how his absence from free agency will affect the rest of the market. Several teams, including the Chicago Bears and New England Patriots, were expected to aggressively pursue Smith. But with him off the board, those teams will now shift their focus to other available guards, the same group of mid-tier linemen that the Dolphins were likely targeting. That increased competition could inflate the value of players like Will Fries, Tevin Jenkins, and Mekhi Becton, making it more difficult for Miami to secure quality help at a reasonable price. This is a significant problem because the Dolphins' offensive line is in desperate need of upgrades, particularly on the interior. If you look at the numbers from last season, the situation was downright brutal. According to Warren Sharp, Miami had the highest stuffed run rate in the NFL since 2017, with 28% of their runs getting shut down at or behind the line of scrimmage. That number jumps to a staggering 46% on third and fourth down, the worst rate since 2019. This isn't just a minor issue, it's a glaring weakness that needs immediate attention. The good news? Dolphins general manager Chris Grier and head coach Mike McDaniel have both acknowledged that fixing the offensive line is a top priority. The bad news? With Smith no longer an option, Miami will have to work harder to secure affordable talent in a now more competitive market. The Dolphins can still make moves through free agency and the draft, but losing a top-tier guard from the pool makes things just a little bit more complicated. Now, let's shift gears to another key free agency decision for the Dolphins. Kader Kohou, the young cornerback, is a restricted free agent, which means Miami has some control over his future. The NFL just released the financials for restricted free agent tenders, and here's what it means for the Dolphins. Miami has a few options. They could apply a right of first refusal tender, which would allow them to match any offer Kohou receives from another team. This would come with a 1-year, $3.2 million contract if no other team makes a move. However, given Kohou's value, that might not be enough to deter other teams from trying to poach him. A more strategic move would be for Miami to place a second-round tender on Kohou, locking him in at a $5.3 million deal for the 2025 season. If another team wants to sign him away, they'd have to give the Dolphins a second-round pick in return. This could effectively scare teams away, allowing Miami to keep a key defensive player at a relatively low cost. So, what makes Kohou so valuable? For starters, he's coming off a solid season in coverage, playing primarily as a nickel corner. While he's not the biggest or most physical cornerback, his coverage skills are impressive. Last year, he allowed a 65% completion rate, held opposing quarterbacks to a 76.0 passer rating, and gave up only a handful of touchdowns. He even contributed on blitzes, adding another dimension to his game. That said, there are concerns. Kohou struggled with missed tackles, recording a 23.3% missed tackle rate, one of the highest in the league. His tackling grade from Pro Football Focus was a dismal 28, highlighting a key weakness in his game. However, when it comes to pure coverage ability, he ranked among the top nickel corners in the league last season. This brings us to a critical question. Should the Dolphins bring Kohou back? Considering their current cornerback depth, the answer seems obvious. Miami recently released Kendall Fuller, and outside of Jalen Ramsey, the Dolphins don't have many reliable options at the position. Cam Smith has been a disappointment, Storm Duck is unproven, and players like Ethan Bonner and Ryan Cooper Jr. aren't ready to take on starting roles. Simply put, Miami needs Kohu, and retaining him at $5.3 million would be a bargain. The reality is that the Dolphins have some tough decisions to make in free agency, but keeping productive players on affordable contracts is a must, especially when they're already paying top dollar for stars like Ramsey, Tua Tagovailoa, Bradley Chubb, and Tyreek Hill. Kohu fits the mold of a cost-effective contributor, and if Miami places a second-round tender on him, they'll likely be able to keep him without much competition. So, what do you think, Dolphins fans? Was losing Trey Smith to the franchise tag a major setback for Miami's free agency plans? And should the Dolphins lock and cater Kohu with a second-round tender, or let him test the market? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and let's keep the conversation going. Beyond the offensive line and cater Kohu's free agency, the Miami Dolphins face even more crucial decisions as they prepare for the 2024 NFL offseason. With free agency just days away, the team must navigate the financial landscape carefully to maximize their roster without overpaying for talent. And let's be real, Miami doesn't have unlimited cap space to throw around. Every move has to be calculated. One of the biggest areas of concern remains the secondary. As mentioned earlier, the Dolphins are looking dangerously thin at cornerback after releasing Kendall Fuller. And while Jalen Ramsey remains one of the best in the game, he can't do it alone. With Kader Kohu's future still uncertain, Miami needs to solidify their defensive backfield before the season starts. That's where the question arises. Should the Dolphins target another cornerback in free agency, or should they address this need through the draft? The free agent market does have some intriguing options, but given Miami's financial constraints, they may not have the flexibility to go after a top-tier name. Someone like Chidobe Awuzie or Sean Murphy-Bunting could be a fit if the price is right, but there's also a case to be made for taking a young, cost-controlled corner in the draft. And speaking of the draft, Miami's overall strategy is still up in the air. While fans are understandably focused on free agency right now, it's important to remember that the Dolphins only have 6 draft picks this year. They have a first-rounder, but after that, they don't pick again until the 3rd round. That means every pick must count. Will they use their top selection on an offensive lineman, a cornerback, or will they look to add depth at another key position? One player to keep an eye on is Alabama offensive lineman J.C. Latham. If the Dolphins decide to go all in on fixing their O-line through the draft, he's the type of player who could step in and contribute right away. But Miami could also look at defensive talent like Kool-Aid McKinstry if they prioritize the secondary. Either way, the Dolphins have to make smart choices, given their limited draft capital. Another factor that complicates everything? The salary cap situation. The Dolphins are currently hovering around the cap limit, which means they'll have to make tough cuts or restructure contracts if they want to be active in free agency. Bradley Chubb's contract is one that could potentially be adjusted to free up space, and there's always the possibility of moving on from some depth players to create more flexibility. But here's the bottom line. The Dolphins are in win-now mode. This isn't a team looking to rebuild. This is a team with Super Bowl aspirations, and every move they make this offseason needs to reflect that. So, Dolphins fans, what do you think? Should Miami make a splash move in free agency, or should they focus on building through the draft? And what do you see as the team's biggest priority right now? Offensive line, cornerback, or something else? Let me know in the comments, and as always, stay locked in for more Dolphins updates as free agency gets underway.